Welcome back, everybody. I feel like it's been a little bit of a while since we've had these videos, but we are all now getting ready for Wednesday's test. Yes, it will not be on Monday, even though I feel like I got voted off the island on that one. But I did put the written, or I should say typed answers to the Part 2 questions on Canvas, so please take a look at that. I just thought it would be easier for you just to have a hard copy of it. So now for these essays, I'm going to just briefly go through the entire chronology. If you pay attention to the hints, I think you'll be able to prepare appropriately. But as the year goes on, I hope you're going to feel very comfortable with these time periods. Okay, so let's get going. These are the time periods that the new AP curriculum wants us to focus on. And for this exam that we're taking, there will not be any essays on this or this. So you can disregard them for the long essay preparation. But just so you all know, this 1491 to 1607 period, that's when we're going to emphasize the Spanish exploration of North America. Remember, the first European permanent settlement was at St. Augustine. 1607 is the breaking point because that is when Jamestown became the first colony for the British, and 1607 to 1754 will be the development of what will eventually become the 13 British North American colonies. However, we're going to focus, for the first review, on the 1754 to 1800 time period. This will be the French and Indian War, which is 1754 to 1763. Because I haven't written in a long time. And then after that will be the causes of the American Revolution, along with the American Revolution. When the Revolution is over, the first form of government is the Articles of Confederation, and then the Constitutional Convention. So what would help you here for a potential essay? Well, the French and Indian War is when the British and the colonists fought on the same side, and they were fighting against the French and many of the Native Americans. They were largely fighting over the Ohio River Valley area. Now, when the war started, William Pitt, British Prime Minister, was in need of soldiers. And he made an unofficial deal, or a promise to the colonists, and said, if you are willing to join in this fight, we will help pay for the war when it is over. Now, the war ends in 1763. The British are victorious, and then they notice that they are in desperate need of money. So they now begin to tax or to enforce the laws that they already had. Please remember that there was a concept called salutary neglect. So the British had laws regulating the colonies. They were called Navigation Acts. And this was all under the mercantilist system, when colonies exist for the benefit of the mother country. But salutary neglect is when you have laws, but you do not enforce them. Now, at the conclusion of this conflict, Parliament will not only enforce the Navigation Acts, but will begin to incorporate more taxes against the colonists. That would be the Stamp Act, which was on all legal documents, newspapers, pamphlets, marriage licenses. The Sugar Act, which was a tax on molasses. The Townshend Acts, which was a tax on paper, paint, lead, glass, and then, of course, tea. And then when they repealed the Townshend Acts, they replaced it with just the Tea Act. And if you recall, the tea tax was trying to save the British East India Company. However, the tax really still made tea less expensive than smuggled tea. So some might criticize the colonists and say that they were really more about the principle of no taxation without representation. Colonists were upset that there was no colonial representation in Parliament. The British responded by saying virtually you are represented. And this is all going to culminate in the Boston Tea Party, when the colonists dressed up as Native Americans and dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. And at this point, tensions are so bad, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet, Common Sense, which leads to the American Revolution by encouraging the colonists to revolt. And remember, when the revolution is over, the first form of government is the Articles of Confederation, and this will be a document with a very weak central government They just got finished dealing with the Parliament, and they did not want to give power. So, for example, the Articles did not have the power to tax, did not have the power of a president, although John Hanson served in that unofficial role as the head of the Confederation Congress. No military, which was evident when they were unable to put down Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts, when farmers were trying to take over the arsenal in Springfield. And the Articles will eventually be replaced by the Constitution. So I feel like I went some depth there for those of you who may need that as a review. Okay, so now we're going to go to the 1800 to 1848 period. This is referred to as the antebellum period. Antebellum meaning before the Civil War. Bellum, bellicose is warlike, the word bellicose, militaristic, and this is before the Civil War. But the only topics economically that we learned about here would be Jackson and the National Bank War, conflict over the tariff. We have not done Manifest Destiny yet, so hopefully you all figure out what I'm saying about that time period. All right. Next, 1844 to 1877 would be your causes of the Civil War. The Civil War itself is in 1861 to 1865, and then Reconstruction. We have not gone over any of this, so we're going to go to the next slide. And here, the 1865 to 1898 time period is extremely significant. You have Reconstruction, which again we have not learned about yet, but we've definitely spent a great deal on the Gilded Age. Now, the Gilded Age is a term that Mark Twain used to refer to the appearance of gold and wealth on the exterior, but in reality, there was great poverty underneath. So what was happening during the Gilded Age is that the government was pursuing a laissez-faire attitude. This philosophy of leaving business alone led to the rise of monopolies during the Gilded Age. And during the Gilded Age, there will be men like John D. Rockefeller, who made money in the oil industry, and Andrew Carnegie, who made money in the steel industry. Rockefeller's company was called Standard Oil. Carnegie's company was called U.S. Steel. Carnegie's a great rags to riches story, self-made millionaire. And as an immigrant from Scotland, made it all the way to one of the richest men in the world. J.P. Morgan, who actually bought Carnegie's company. And Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was involved in the railroad industry, which sometimes does not get the respect that it deserves for contributing to the economic wealth of the Gilded Age. Now, don't worry about the presidents during the Gilded Age, because you probably won't know any of them other than Grover Cleveland, but the presidents took a back seat to these big businessmen. Some people thought they were captains of industry who contributed greatly to the wealth of America. Other people called them robber barons for their unethical practices. And that's a debate that is still taking place today. Also during the Gilded Age, you will see the rise of labor unions, workers are trying to respond to their deteriorating conditions in the factories, low wages. You may recall the Haymarket riot. That was when the Knights of Labor took part in a protest in Chicago, looking for better wages, better working conditions, and shorter hours. However, the protest turned violent when potentially a group of anarchists, but we still don't know who, threw a bomb at the police, killing 7 of them. So that led to the decline of the Knights of Labor. The strike that there was also Carnegie's Homestead strike, where at his plant workers were upset, but he wasn't in the country at the time. But I really emphasized with you the Pullman strike, so hopefully you can remember this. And the Pullman strike is when George Pullman, who was the owner of the Pullman Palace Car Company, invented the sleeping car for the railroad, but he also had a town for his workers to live in. And when the Panic of 1893 hit, he cut their wages but left their rent the same. So the leader of the union, Eugene V. Debs, who was a socialist, organized a massive strike of any worker who was impacted by this, and they shut down a large percentage of the railroad traffic in the country. However, President Grover Cleveland, siding with big business, required that they go back to work, claiming that their strike was interfering with the transit of the mail, which is a federal agency. Anything else during the Gilded Age? You could emphasize new inventions, better technology, patents, and you could mention that the government made an effort to regulate the railroads with the Interstate Commerce Act, and also they made an effort with monopolies with the Sherman Antitrust Act. But both of these were at first loosely enforced and ineffective. Interstate Commerce Act, which is 1887, I believe, and the Sherman Antitrust Act is definitely 1894. Interstate Commerce Act was a response to the Grange, if you remember how the farmers wanted to regulate the railroads, but the Supreme Court first ruled in favor of the Grange and then 1 year later against them. So government tried to regulate the railroads. The Sherman Antitrust Act was an attempt to break up monopolies. It actually worked on fighting against unions at first. Okay, and don't worry about imperialism because we haven't learned it yet. Great. So now we go to the next time period, 1890 to 1945. We have two potential topics here. First, the Progressive Era. So now the Progressive Era is going to be a response to the Gilded Age. Then during the Progressive Era, we will have three presidents, Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. And the whole philosophy of the government will change now to have greater government regulation of the economy. Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican, Taft was a Republican, and Wilson was a Democrat. Teddy Roosevelt's plan is called the Square Deal, and he wanted to provide everybody with an equal opportunity to survive and to prosper in this great economic wealth that was garnered during the Gilded Age. Included in the Square Deal, this is actually all in the Part 2 response, but I'll go through it quickly. Remember, muckrakers were exposing all of these problems in society. And the most famous muckraker at the time, Upton Sinclair, actually, I think I just made that up, the one we know the most, Upton Sinclair, wrote a book called The Jungle, all about the meatpacking industry. That led to the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act, which will be a consumer protection proposal that Congress passed. Teddy Roosevelt, so he is in favor of the consumers. Teddy Roosevelt also threatened to take over the mines when the anthracite coal miners' strike took place. Very concerned about providing his people with heat as the winter approached, and he did force them to settle that dispute. So unlike Grover Cleveland, he is seen as being more on the side of the people. Teddy Roosevelt also was a conservationist who cared deeply about creating national parks so that he could hunt and kill animals and put them in his house. And Teddy Roosevelt regulated the railroads, and he's known as being a trust buster. And I saved that for last because he gets the reputation for being a trust buster, breaking up what he considered bad trusts. He made a distinction. However, it was actually Taft who broke up more trusts, twice as many trusts in half the time. When Roosevelt left the White House after his second term, he supported Taft for the presidency, but then Taft disappointed him, and that made Roosevelt come back and run again in 1912, and in 1912, his inclusion as a bull moose candidate will lead to Woodrow Wilson becoming president because the Republicans, Roosevelt and Taft, split the vote. And Wilson, as far as progressive ideology, the Federal Reserve is created under Wilson's presidency. And if you want to remember, the graduated income tax became an amendment. Okay, imperialism we have not covered yet. World War I we have not covered yet, but we've definitely done the Roaring Twenties. So during the 1920s, you will have 3 Republican presidents: Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge, and Herbert Hoover. There will be no references to Jerry during this discussion. All 3 of these men are Republicans. All 3 of them believe in limited government. If you wanted to write laissez-faire, you can. That is fine. And all 3 of them have the same Treasury Secretary, whose name was Andrew Mellon. And Andrew Mellon supported tax cuts for the wealthy. So during the 1920s, we are focusing on cutting people's taxes at the top to stimulate economic development. Now, as far as Harding's achievements, very underrated in many people's eyes. I shouldn't say that. He's underrated. If he's in many people's eyes, he wouldn't be underrated. Underrated in my eyes. He believed in he did support lower tax cuts, and as a result of that, he lowered inflation, he lowered government spending, unemployment dropped, and he cut down the national debt. So there's a lot of facts that do support that Harding's short term as president was successful. Warren G. Harding, and remember, if people still don't know when I make these Jerry jokes, Warren G. Harding, his love letters were released this summer, and we learned a lot more about his personal life and his affair. Okay, when he dies in 1923, Calvin Coolidge becomes president. Calvin Coolidge was very much in favor of laissez-faire, and even said the chief business of America is business, focused everything he could on business prosperity. He will run in 1924. He wins in that election and then decides not to run in 1928. Please remember that all throughout the 20s, prohibition is in effect, so alcohol is illegal. And what else are some of the concepts of the economic development in the 20s? People were using credit, so there was installment buying, buy now, pay later. There was the automobile industry. Henry Ford's Model T revolutionized, making cars available to more people, produced very quickly. And remember all the industries that developed because of the automobile. There's more consumerism, all these new products that are being made, vacuum cleaners, toaster ovens. You have department stores that are building up. I don't think I told you Sears was the first, I think, mail order catalog. And then we get to President Hoover. And Hoover you should be familiar with since you did such a great job on your essays there. But Hoover continues with these policies. He just then is dealt with October 29th, 1929, the stock market crash. And remember, people were now using the concept of credit to buy stocks on margin. Same principle, 10% down, you would pay the rest when the stocks went up. The crash crippled Hoover's presidency, and I think I can stop there. Just as an additional thing, farmers did not do well during the 1920s. Okay, some people, we are not writing an essay on the Great Depression since you already did that. We haven't learned about World War II yet, so we're now going to go to the post-World War II era. And just like the 1920s followed World War I, the 1950s follows World War II. And really, for historical circumstances, we begin this in 1945 to 1960. And what's going to happen after World War II? Well, we have 2 presidents. We have one Democrat, and that was Truman. And then we have a Republican, and that was Eisenhower. Now, let's first talk about the post-World War II era. The GI Bill was passed. This was for veterans returning home. The GI Bill gave them money for a down payment for a house, also gave them money for education. There's going to be a baby boom after World War II. When the soldiers come home, the population explodes after from 1945 to 1960. Because we have such a great need for housing, there will be the growth of the suburbs after World War II, and Levittown will be one of the great symbols of that growth, where William Levitt bought a potato field on Long Island to build cheap and affordable and quickly produced homes that all look alike. And then with, I think with air conditioning coming in, you're going to see the growth of the Sun Belt region from Florida to California, where people are moving there for the lower taxes or no taxes or better weather. Now, Truman's idea, domestic programs called the Fair Deal, and he's going to continue the philosophy of the New Deal, not anywhere near to the extent of Eisenhower, but he will maintain more of a government involvement in the economy. But when Eisenhower becomes president, he slightly changes the focus. Now, Eisenhower, as a Republican, did not fully support the New Deal, but he also recognized that he wasn't going to be able to dismantle it. So he calls his version of politics modern republicanism. And it's definitely limited in economic development, but he's a little bit more liberal on social programs. And his greatest achievement would be the Interstate Highway Act, 1956, which was used as a way for us to connect all of our cities in the case of an attack by the Soviets. Now, what were the taxes during the 50s? Unlike the 20s, where the taxes were very low, taxes were still high in the 50s, yet both decades did have great prosperity. Similar to the automobile in the 20s, you have the television in the 1950s. There's advertising during both decades, and I think I've pretty much covered all that. Okay, now we go to the 60s, and in the 60s you will have two Democratic presidents. You will have JFK, and then you will have LBJ. Now, as far as JFK, we really don't know what his economic policies would have been. He really focused more on foreign affairs during his short time as president. He definitely was a liberal, and I think he would have wanted more government aid to education. I think he would have supported healthcare reform and fixing up our cities. But just keep in mind, Congress would not work with him. For whatever reason, he had a very difficult time getting any legislation passed through Congress. Could be because he was young, or maybe they just didn't like him. But he will be, after he is assassinated, will be replaced by LBJ. And we know an awful lot about LBJ's plan. LBJ is going to be influenced greatly by a book called The Other America. And the title of this book, The Other America, which was written by Michael Harrington, is a book that focuses on the 40 million Americans who were still living in poverty during this time period. So this really sparked LBJ's desire to maintain the concept behind the New Deal. And he wants greater government involvement to uplift people. So, for example, he will support Head Start, which is a preschool federally funded education program. He created the Job Corps, which was going to focus on vocational education. More literacy programs for people. He wanted to create the Community Action Program, which allowed poor people to run some of the programs within their neighborhoods. And he is going to call his legislative achievements the Great Society Reforms. So included, in addition to those that I just said, he creates Medicare, which is a health insurance policy for people over 65. He creates Medicaid, which is going to pay for medical care for the poor and the disabled. He had a Food Stamp Act, which is going to expand the program to buy food for poor people. So all of these Great Society reforms really take us as a continuation of the concept of more government involvement during the New Deal. And I'm just realizing he also, I forgot to say, also supported the building of low-income housing in wealthier areas to try to encourage social mobility upward. Okay, and then the 70s refer to my review sheet because I have something about Nixon, Ford, and Carter there. So I feel comfortable that I've now covered any possible essay that I may have given you. I wish you all the best of luck. I went to a workshop on Friday about the flipped classroom, and the presenter's video included him with his teddy bear, and I just going to tell you guys now that I don't anticipate that happening for us, but I'll get this webcam up and running shortly. I wish you all the best of luck. As always, email me if you have any questions. In class, come prepared if you have any questions. Don't wait to the last minute, although if you did wait to the last minute, it's too late me telling you that right now. And now I'm rambling, so I am going to go out. Have a great day.